Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story. The sound of laughter echoed through the grand halls of the Evergreen Manor as I made my way across the polished marble floors. The place had a way of making everything feel like a spectacle. The chandeliers hung above, dripping with crystals, their light bouncing off the gleaming surfaces like a million tiny stars. The whole room was dressed in elegant black and gold, with elegantly clad guests swirling around the space. The smell of expensive perfume and freshly polished wood hit me as I stepped in. I tried to push the feeling of dread away, reminding myself that this was for a good cause. The scholarship fund I supported was one of the evening's beneficiaries, so it should have been a moment of pride. But instead, it was suffocating. My name is Emily Larson. I'm 40, and I've spent most of my life walking the fine line between my academic career and my family's business. Everyone in this room knew me as the daughter of Henry Larson, the man who built Larson Construction into the behemoth it was today. The daughter who turned her back on all of that. I could already hear the whispers behind my back, the polite curiosity masked by the laughter. The daughter who didn't follow the family legacy. What a shame. The stories they told about me. None of it ever mattered in my world. None of it was what I cared about, and yet here I was again surrounded by them. Bakem, I hated these events, but they were necessary. They were the charity galas that my father had put together to showcase his wealth and prestige, and my mother's carefully crafted social standing. Every year, my family invited me as the token daughter who had rejected the legacy, and I had to pretend that it didn't sting. I took a deep breath and headed out to the terrace. It was a little quieter out there, a little more private. The wind was cool against my face, and I welcomed it. I could hear the muffled hum of the gala from inside, but out here, I could think. I leaned against the railing, my fingers brushing the smooth stone, gazing at the view of the estate's sprawling grounds. I had worked hard to get here, to build my own career in theoretical chemistry. I had gone to the Ivy League, had earned accolades, had made discoveries that could change the world. Yet somehow, none of it had ever been enough for my father. He had always wanted me to join Larson Construction, take over the family business. I would be the perfect heir in his eyes. But the truth was, I couldn't do it. I wanted to make my own way, to leave my mark in a field that I loved, not one that was built on expectations I never shared. I heard his voice before I saw him, a deep, booming call that broke through the quiet of the night. Emily! Henry Larson, my father, waved me over from the steps leading back into the house, as though he hadn't already seen me standing here for the past few minutes. I closed my eyes for a brief second. I'd been dreading this moment all night. The moment where he would remind everyone, loudly, that I had turned my back on the family business, as he loved to put it, as though his pride in his construction empire somehow defined my entire life. I walked towards him slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Even at 40, I still couldn't shake the sting of his public reminders that I was a disappointment. Come on over, sweetheart, he said with an exaggerated smile, his arm slung across the shoulder of Mark Jensen, the head of a local bank, and Dr. Stanley Pritchard, the prominent local doctor. Two men who had never looked beyond my family's business to see me as anything other than Henry's daughter. I forced a smile, one that was practiced over the years. Hi, Dad, I said, my voice steady but carrying the weight of everything I knew was coming. Well, here's Emily, my father announced to the men with a tone that was louder than necessary, the one who could have had it all, but instead chose to waste her life in academics, pursuing that nonsense science, Ivy League education and all that, but what for? I felt my stomach twist at the familiar sting of his words. Even as an adult with my own successes and a life I'd built, he still thought of me as little more than a failed expectation. It wasn't new, it wasn't even shocking. I had been hearing it for years. I stayed silent, letting the words wash over me. I knew better than to get into another round of arguments that wouldn't go anywhere. I had learned that long ago. Instead, I focused on the glass in my hand, taking a slow sip of my wine, letting the conversation float around me like static noise. Mark Jensen glanced over at me, his gaze almost pitying. Must be nice living in the world of academia. I can't imagine what that's like. But your father's right, Emily. You could have been running things over at Larson Construction. I fought the urge to roll my eyes, the frustration simmering just beneath my calm exterior. They didn't get it. None of them did. They saw a daughter who had defied the business her father had built and didn't understand why I could have wanted something different. But I knew this would escalate soon. It always did. The alcohol would start flowing, and the remarks would become sharper, more pointed. and then I'd have to retreat, as I always did. It was the cycle, and I hated it. I glanced at my father, who was now bragging about the latest addition to the construction empire, his voice louder, more theatrical. I was already preparing myself for the next round of his public humiliation when I heard the sound of footsteps coming from behind me. "Dad, we need to talk," I muttered, cutting him off before he could continue on about another business deal. His eyes flicked over to me, and I saw the flicker of irritation. He hated being interrupted in front of people. He hated being challenged by me, his daughter, who wouldn't follow in his footsteps. But this was my moment. I wasn't going to let this night unfold without making him see, just once, that my choices were my own. I approached my father and his associates with the kind of calm I had mastered over the years. It wasn't anger that I felt, or even resentment, just a dull, familiar ache. I had become accustomed to these moments where my life choices were publicly scrutinized, but that didn't make it any easier. I kept my chin high, as though it didn't sting every time my father spoke of me like I had somehow failed. "Ah, Emily, come on over," my father called, his voice booming, as though announcing something grand. His broad hand waved in the air, motioning me toward the group of men, who were all too eager to engage in his storytelling. As I joined them, my father didn't miss a beat. "Gentlemen, this is my daughter, Emily. She could have had it all." The Larson construction empire was hers for the taking. His voice had a particular edge, one that was both dismissive and a little too loud, as though reminding everyone around us how much I had turned my back on. Instead, she chose to waste her life away in academia, chasing after that useless research. I bit the inside of my cheek. My breath remained steady as I gave a polite smile, though inside, it felt like everything was unraveling. The irritation began to bubble to the surface, but I knew better than to let it out. Not here, not in front of them. "Us academics don't always think about practical matters," I heard Mark Jensen, the head of the local bank, say, with a teasing smile. "I'm sure your work's valuable, though." Dr. Stanley Pritchard, who had been quiet until now, nodded with a light chuckle. "I imagine it's a lot of hard work, but I'll admit, I still don't get it. How do you make a living off of, theoretical science?" My father laughed along with them. It was the same laugh I had heard 100 times at family dinners, the kind that wasn't really a laugh, but a thinly veiled judgment disguised as humor. "I don't get it either," my father added, shaking his head. "She's got her Ivy League degree and yet can't seem to see the value in a steady, hands-on business." The words stung, even now. I had heard them all before, but that didn't mean they didn't hit just as hard. This was the pattern I had come to expect at these events. My father reminding everyone how his daughter was the one who didn't live up to expectations. The daughter who chose an uncertain path over wealth and prestige. I kept my gaze steady. "I find my work fulfilling," I said simply, keeping my voice even. "It's more about making a difference than it is about a paycheck." Henry's face twisted for a moment, the corner of his mouth twitching as if he was about to retort with one of his usual dismissive remarks. But I knew better than to engage in that. Not here, not tonight, not when I knew how this conversation would end. It always ended with me retreating, mentally preparing for the inevitable disappointment he would voice next. "Well, I suppose there's value in what you do, though." Henry's tone shifted, as if suddenly realizing how harsh his words had been. He clapped Mark on the shoulder. "But let's be honest, couldn't you have put that brainpower to better use? Running a company like Larson Construction would have been a real legacy, one that could be passed down, built upon. Instead, she's off chasing numbers and formulas that no one outside her field will ever appreciate." I held my breath. It was almost worse when he spoke in that neutral, disappointed tone. It was as if my life was just some unfortunate detour, that nothing I had done, nothing I had accomplished, would ever be enough for him. And worse, these men, all these powerful, influential men, stood around nodding along, as though they shared the same view. They were all part of the crowd that couldn't see past my family name, that couldn't fathom a world where success didn't mean a golden business card and power suits. As my father's words grew louder and more pointed, I could feel the familiar flush of frustration building. I knew the alcohol was starting to hit the group. They were loosening up, becoming more vocal. My father's scorn would only get worse as the night wore on, and as always, I would take it. I would endure it. I would listen as he made me feel small, insignificant, for choosing a path that didn't align with his vision of what I should be. I felt the tightness in my chest, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to explain myself to them. They would never understand. They didn't care to understand. So I stayed quiet, let them continue their judgment as the night pressed on, knowing the sting of his words would fade as it always did. This was my reality, one I had long accepted. I only hoped, as the evening dragged on, that somewhere in the mix of alcohol and conversation, I might find a moment of peace, a quiet space where my father, for once, might see me for who I truly was. But I had little hope for that. Tonight, it would be the same as every other night, and that's how I would survive it, quietly, without a word, and with a smile that said nothing at all. The night had taken on a familiar rhythm. My father's voice was growing louder as the alcohol flowed, his words cutting through the crowd like a hot knife. I had learned long ago that these public spectacles weren't just about him showing off his business empire. They were about putting me in my place, reminding everyone that I was the one who had chosen a path he deemed unworthy. I could feel the tension building in my chest as my father continued to belittle my work in academia. Mark Jensen, the head of a local bank, and Dr. Stanley Pritchard, a renowned local doctor, had long since settled into their roles as silent supporters of Henry's narrative. The men nodded along politely, not understanding the full weight of his words. But I did. I always did. Honestly, gentlemen, my father was saying now, his voice almost booming. You could have had the world at your feet. My daughter, Emily, could have been running Larson Construction, had all the prestige, the wealth. But instead, he waved a dismissive hand in my direction. She's off playing with chemicals, pretending it's worth anything. Mark and Dr. Pritchard gave their token chuckles, as though they hadn't heard the same conversation a dozen times before. I held my breath. If I didn't, I'd be tempted to argue, to lash out, but it would be a waste of energy. I was used to it. But then something unexpected happened. Mark Jensen, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up suddenly, his eyes widening with surprise. He glanced at me for a moment before swiping again. "Hold on a second," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I think I just saw something here." I tensed, wondering where this was going. My father didn't seem to notice, still lost in his tirade about how I had thrown away a sure thing in construction for the sake of useless science. Mark cleared his throat and looked up at me. "Emily," he said, his tone much more curious now, "I think this is about you." I was taken aback. "What are you—" "Hang on," he said, holding up his hand, and began reading aloud from his phone screen. "This article just came out, and it's talking about a groundbreaking chemical process that could change the world. It's in renewable energy and climate science." He trailed off, scanning the article further, his eyes slowly widening. "Wait, this is your research, isn't it?" My heart skipped a beat. I had seen the article earlier in the day, but I hadn't expected it to make its way to the gala, let alone be read aloud in front of my father and his associates. The article detailed my latest discovery, a new chemical process with the potential to revolutionize energy production on a global scale, one that could provide clean energy solutions to the world's biggest environmental challenges. I felt my palms grow clammy, but I didn't say anything. I just waited, watching as my father's face shifted from confusion to surprise. His eyes flickered to me for the first time that night. "You've been working on this?" Henry asked, his voice suddenly quieter, almost unsure. His eyes darted between Mark and me, his face full of questions. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes, Dad. That's my work." Mark Jensen leaned forward, now completely interested. "This could be huge, Emily. This isn't just some academic research. If what this article is saying is true, this could change the way the world produces energy." My father blinked, trying to process what was happening. His gaze flicked from the phone back to me, disbelief in his eyes. "So, this is your project? The one you've been pouring all your time into?" His words hung in the air like an accusation, though I wasn't sure what he was accusing me of anymore. "Yes," I replied, steadying my breath. "I've been working on this for years. This is what I've dedicated my life to." Dr. Pritchard, who had been silent up until this moment, finally spoke, his tone filled with genuine admiration. "This is incredible, Emily. This process could change everything. Imagine what it could do for medical diagnostics, let alone energy production. And you've been working on it alone?" I nodded. The praise was unexpected, but it didn't feel out of place. I had been grinding away at this project for so long, pouring everything I had into it, away from the eyes of my family, away from the weight of their expectations. Henry was still processing. He stared at me, unable to form a coherent response. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to reconcile this new revelation with the daughter he had long dismissed. Finally, he spoke again, though his words came out slowly. I didn't know, he muttered, his voice tinged with something that resembled surprise, or maybe regret. I didn't know you were capable of something like this. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. You never gave me the chance to show you, Dad. Mark, sensing the growing tension, cleared his throat and smiled warmly. You should be proud, Henry. She's done something remarkable here. Henry didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his attention back to me, his face softening ever so slightly. For a moment, I thought he might actually say something that resembled pride. But then, he just shook his head, still unable to fully grasp what had just been revealed to him. Well, I'll be damned, he said, his voice finally lowering to something approaching respect. I guess I owe you an apology. The words hung there, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe it might not be too late to be seen, for who I really was. The gala's energy had shifted as Mark Jensen continued to read through the article, his voice louder with each word, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. My father stood there, frowning, and I could feel the weight of his silence pressing on me. For the first time in a long while, the noise from the gala, the chatter, the laughter, faded into the background. All that mattered now was this moment. I stood still, letting the words Mark had read hang in the air like a revelation. I had spent years working on this project, but hearing it described so plainly was almost surreal. A chemical breakthrough that could revolutionize renewable energy. A solution for the energy crisis that had the potential to change everything. And what does this mean for you? Mark asked, looking up from the phone screen. This is monumental. I can't imagine how big this could get. I tried to steady my breathing. It's a game changer, I said quietly, keeping my voice even, despite the flood of emotions swirling in my chest. It's more than just a scientific discovery. It's about making a real impact, a tangible difference in the world. My father's eyebrows furrowed as he processed the information, trying to reconcile the daughter he had long dismissed as insignificant with the woman standing before him. A woman who had been quietly changing the world while he saw only failure. His voice when he spoke was low, still trying to grasp the full weight of the revelation. But, Emily, you've been working on this. For how long? Years, I said, the pride in my voice betraying the calm I was trying so hard to maintain. I've been working with a team on this for a long time, and it's finally starting to pay off. Henry's face was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. I don't understand. You've been working in secret all this time? He glanced around at his colleagues as if searching for someone to explain it all. I nodded. It's not about the spotlight. It's about the work. The science? I hesitated before continuing. It's never been about impressing anyone. Not you, not anyone else. It's about what I can contribute. But as I said those words, the truth hit me. This was the moment. This was where everything changed. My father, standing there in front of me, would have to see me for who I truly was, not his failure, not the daughter who had rejected the family business, but someone who had done something truly remarkable. Before my father could respond, Dr. Pritchard, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke up. This could have massive implications, not just for energy, but for medicine, diagnostics. This process, Emily, it could revolutionize so much more than we imagined. My father's gaze flicked from Dr. Pritchard to me, a hint of disbelief still in his eyes. But now, there was something else there, something I hadn't seen in years, a trace of respect. Is that what you've been working on? My father asked, his voice quieter now. A solution like that? I nodded, my chest tight. Yes, and there are companies around the world, including energy firms and tech giants, that have taken notice. We've secured multi-million-dollar grants and collaborations. It's a lucrative deal. Over $1 billion in funding, with the potential for more. The words hung in the air for a moment, and I watched my father's face tighten. I could see the shift. He was grappling with a realization he wasn't ready to face. Mark's voice cut through the silence. And all of this, Emily? This incredible breakthrough, and you're living in a small apartment and driving an old car? I nodded again, almost too tired to respond. Yes, I've never wanted the wealth. I've always lived modestly. My focus has been on the work, not the money. Henry blinked, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. But this kind of success, you're telling me you've done all of this, and you're still living like you're struggling? He seemed to be trying to process the idea that the woman who had discovered something world-changing was doing so from behind the scenes, far removed from the wealth and luxury that his world had always celebrated. Mark gave a knowing look. There's something to be said for that kind of humility. It's rare to see someone so successful not flaunting it. The guests around us, including Dr. Pritchard, began to murmur their admiration, marveling at the full scope of what I had accomplished. Emily, Dr. Pritchard said, shaking his head in awe, this is more than just a scientific advancement. This is a legacy, a true contribution to humanity. I could feel the change in the room as more people began to recognize the weight of what had been revealed. For years, I had been the disappointing daughter, the one who had chosen a different path. But here, in this moment, surrounded by my father's peers, I wasn't just the daughter who rejected the family legacy. I was someone whose work had the power to change the world. And slowly, as the realization dawned on my father, I saw the cracks in his facade begin to show. He had spent so many years dismissing me, but now he was faced with the truth. The daughter he had once labeled a failure was the one who had changed the game. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to prove myself. My work had already done that. The air around us had shifted. Henry stood there, processing the revelation, his expression slowly evolving from confusion to something else, something I couldn't quite place. For the first time in a long while, my father looked at me, truly looked at me, as though seeing me for who I was and not just the daughter who had turned her back on the family business. Mark Jensen leaned forward, his face full of admiration as he turned to Henry. You know, Henry, when I first heard about Emily's work, I didn't fully understand it, but now? This is nothing short of groundbreaking. She's reshaping industries, and not just in a way that's about profit. This is legacy-making stuff. Dr. Pritchard, still watching with quiet interest, nodded. She's one of the most impactful scientists of her generation. This is what true contribution looks like. My father's lips parted, but no words came out. I saw the realization beginning to dawn on him. The daughter he had dismissed as a failure was now being acknowledged as one of the leading forces in a field that could alter the future, a future he had never imagined she could create. For a moment, the group fell silent. My father's eyes locked on mine, filled with something unfamiliar. It wasn't scorn anymore. It wasn't disappointment. It was recognition. Emily, he began, his voice shaky. He stopped himself, visibly struggling with the flood of emotions overtaking him. I had no idea. His words hung in the air, soft but heavy. I could see the effort it took for him to speak them, to acknowledge something that didn't fit into the narrow vision he'd held for me all these years. The vision where I should have been running Larson Construction, working alongside him to build a legacy. The vision where my work in science had never been more than a distraction. I didn't know what to say at first. The apology I had longed for had never come in such a quiet, fragile form. But this was my moment to speak, and I knew it. I had the floor now, in a way I'd never had before. I didn't choose research because I wanted to escape the family business, Dad, I said, my voice calm, though the weight of everything I had been holding inside came rushing to the surface. I chose it because I wanted to make a real difference. I've always been driven by curiosity, by the idea that I could contribute to something bigger than myself. I let my words settle in the space between us before continuing. I didn't want to chase material wealth or accolades. I wanted to know that my work could change the world in a meaningful way. The quiet that followed felt heavy, filled with all the things that had been left unsaid for so long. Henry stood motionless, as if his body couldn't quite catch up with his mind. But Mark Jensen, sensing the shift, gave me an approving nod. Emily, I have to say, I didn't understand your decision all those years ago, Mark said, his tone sincere. But now, it's clear. You've done more than anyone could have imagined. You're making a difference on a scale that's truly rare. My father, still grappling with everything he had just learned, finally spoke. I've spent all this time looking at success in the wrong way, haven't I? His voice was quieter now, filled with uncertainty. I could feel the weight of that question, the acknowledgement that for years he had measured success only by material gain, only by his legacy. And here I was, his daughter, making a difference in a way he never could have imagined. He had dismissed it all as irrelevant, and now, faced with the enormity of what I had achieved, he was realizing just how wrong he had been. You've built a legacy of your own, Emily, he said, his voice shaking with something raw. I can see that now, and I've been blind to it. All these years. The apology that had been so elusive was here now, spoken quietly, but with more sincerity than I could have hoped for. The anger and bitterness that had built up inside me over the years began to fade, replaced by something softer, something close to acceptance. "It's okay, Dad," I replied, my voice steady. "I know you wanted what was best for me. But sometimes, what's best isn't the easiest path." Henry blinked, his gaze softening. He seemed like he was trying to find the right words, but the weight of it all left him fumbling for a moment. "You've made me proud, Emily," he finally said. The words simple but real. "I should have seen it before. I'm sorry for not seeing you for who you truly are." For a moment, everything felt like it had shifted, like the pieces had fallen into place. The years of frustration, of feeling unseen, felt distant now, like a memory I could finally let go of. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Not just an apology, but an acknowledgement. Not just for my work, but for me. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not as the daughter who had turned her back on the family, but as someone who had built something of value, on her own terms. A legacy of her own. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable now. It was a quiet understanding, a moment where we both grasped the weight of what had just shifted. "Thank you, Dad," I said softly. "It means more than you know." And in that moment, for the first time, I believed it. The words lingered in the air like a fragile bridge between us. My father, still standing with his hands slightly raised as if unsure of what to do with them, looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, uncertain, almost vulnerable. For the first time in my life, it felt like he was really looking at me, not just as his daughter who had disappointed him, but as someone he could truly be proud of. "Emily," he began, his voice quieter than usual, I, I've spent so many years measuring success by my own standards. My standards? I never really stopped to think about what mattered to you." He paused, a faint sigh escaping his lips. "I guess I've been too blind to see what you've been doing all this time." His words were soft, hesitant, but there was sincerity in them. It was an apology, though not one that I had expected in front of a crowd like this. Not one that I thought I would ever hear from him. A weak apology, but still, an apology. I could feel the weight of his regret. And though part of me wanted to press him further, to demand more from him, I stopped myself. Instead, I took a slow, steady breath and looked him in the eyes. "It's okay, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I know you wanted what was best for me, but I've always had to do things my way." His eyes softened as he nodded, though I could tell it was hard for him to swallow that. The world he had built, the empire he had worked so hard for, was no longer the measure of success. It was something else entirely. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if he fully understood how much that shift had cost both of us. Mark Jensen, sensing the fragile moment, spoke up, his tone filled with a quiet respect. "Henry, I think you've always been proud of Emily's achievements, even if it didn't look the way you imagined. You just didn't see it at first. But what she's done, what she's creating here, it's extraordinary." I glanced at Mark, surprised by the depth of his words. It wasn't just the success that had impressed him. It was the drive, the vision that had been behind all of it. "Exactly, Doctor," Pritchard added, his voice warm and admiring. "It's rare to see someone who has so much potential and yet chooses to stay out of the spotlight. Emily's dedication, her quiet passion, that's what makes her work so powerful. She's built something that will change the world, and not for the fame, but because it's needed." I felt a swell of pride rise in my chest, hearing those words from people like Mark and Dr. Pritchard. It was validation in a way I hadn't expected, and yet it felt earned. Henry's face shifted once again, a mix of disbelief and pride in his expression. It was as if he were finally seeing everything for what it was. "I never thought about it like that," he admitted softly, looking between me and the two men. "All these years. I just wanted you to follow in my footsteps. I thought that was the right way. I didn't understand what it meant to follow your own path." His voice trembled slightly, but it was clear now that he wasn't just regretting his words from tonight. This regret ran deeper. It was about everything he had ever said, about the years he had spent pushing me away. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for him to make up for the lost years. Instead, I was letting the truth settle in. The truth that he had always loved me. He just hadn't known how to show it. Not until now. "I'm proud of you, Emily," Henry said quietly, his voice breaking a little. "I don't know if I've ever told you that, but I am. I just didn't know how to say it until now." The words were like a balm on years of old wounds, a soothing acknowledgement that I had always longed for. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. "Thank you, Dad. I've always wanted you to be proud. But I also needed to be true to myself. even if it wasn't what you expected. There was a long silence between us, and I could feel the tension lifting as Henry finally reached out, a hesitant hand toward mine. For a moment, we both just stood there, looking at each other. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but it was everything I had been waiting for. Then, in a moment of rare humility, Henry added, I spent so many years trying to shape you into someone you weren't. Maybe it's time I let you shape the future in your own way? I squeezed his hand, a small smile playing at the corners of my lips. It's never too late, Dad, I said softly. We can always find our way back to each other. Just like my work, relationships can be rebuilt too. He nodded slowly, his eyes searching mine, as if he were seeing me in a completely new light. I'm starting to understand that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I'm ready to listen. For the first time, I believed him. As the night continued around us, with the guests slowly returning to their conversations, I felt a new sense of peace settle over me. I had spent years trying to prove myself to him, trying to gain his approval. But in this moment, I realized that I no longer needed to prove anything. My work, my passion, my choices, they spoke for themselves. And for the first time, my father could see that too. As the evening unfolded, we talked more, just the two of us. And for the first time, I felt like we were finally building something real, a connection based on understanding, respect, and the beginning of something we could both be proud of. The evening ceremony was a blur of applause, speeches, and well-dressed students. I stood at the back of the room, waiting for my moment. I had been invited to speak to the scholarship recipients, my foundation's scholarship recipients. These were the students who had been given the chance to pursue their dreams because of the work I had put in, the work that, until tonight, had been dismissed as nothing more than useless academic nonsense. As I watched the students file into their seats, I realized how much this night had changed, not just for me, but for my father too. I could feel his presence in the room, his quiet pride as he sat in the front row among the other guests, finally seeing me for who I was. No longer the daughter who had defied expectations, but the scientist whose work was helping shape the future. When my name was called, I stood up slowly, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. The walk to the stage felt surreal. The crowd's eyes on me made my heart race, but for the first time in years, I wasn't scared. This wasn't about my father's approval or the weight of expectations. This was about my work, my achievements, and the students who would carry the torch forward. As I approached the podium, I saw my father sitting in the front row. He had his hands folded in front of him, his eyes locked on me, as though waiting to hear what I would say. For the first time, I saw the respect in his eyes, the recognition that I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was a force in my own right. I cleared my throat, adjusting the microphone. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice steady. It's an honor to be here tonight, to stand before such an inspiring group of students who, like me, are driven by curiosity and the desire to make a difference. The room was quiet, all attention on me. I felt the weight of every word as I spoke. I'm here tonight because I know what it's like to struggle for a chance, to have a dream, and fight to make it real. I've spent my career studying chemistry, trying to understand the world around us, and most importantly, trying to solve problems that matter. I glanced at the students in the front row, their faces full of hope. The work I've done in renewable energy, in climate science, is just one example of how science can change the world. But none of that would be possible without the kind of education that gives us the tools to dream big and reach higher. That's why I'm so proud to be here tonight, supporting students who will one day change the world. I took a breath, letting the words sink in. You, the scholarship recipients, are the future. Your hard work and dedication are what will shape the world of tomorrow, and I believe that with every fiber of my being. Keep pushing forward, keep dreaming, and never let anyone tell you that your work doesn't matter. There was a pause, and I could feel the energy shift in the room. I looked at my father again. His face was a picture of pride, his eyes softened with a newfound understanding. For the first time, I could see him truly seeing me, not just his daughter, but the woman who had built something meaningful. As I finished my speech, the room erupted into applause, and I couldn't help but smile. But it wasn't just for me, it was for them, the students who would take what I had started and build something even bigger. The future was theirs now, just as it had always been mine. And as the applause died down, I caught my father's eye. For the first time, there was no distance between us, no resentment, no misunderstanding. Just a quiet understanding, one that didn't need words. I stepped off the stage, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. As the crowd continued to mingle, I made my way back to my seat. My father was waiting for me, his hand already extended. I took it, feeling the weight of everything that had changed between us. "Emily," he said, his voice low but filled with warmth. "You've done something incredible. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." I smiled, the words I had longed to hear now ringing with truth. "It's okay, Dad. It's never too late to understand." And with that, for the first time, I felt like we were truly starting over. After the ceremony, the gala's crowd began to disperse, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The evening had been a turning point, both for me and for my relationship with my father. As the last of the guests filed out, I found myself standing next to him, alone, for the first time in years. The noise from the event faded, and all I could hear was the soft hum of the evening air. Henry looked at me, his hands clasped together in front of him, his posture a little more relaxed than I'd ever seen it before. He wasn't just my father right now. He was a man who had witnessed a shift in his world, one that was hard to ignore. A shift in how he saw me, how he saw the work I had dedicated my life to. I'm not sure what I was expecting tonight," he said slowly, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "But I know I wasn't expecting this." He gestured toward me, as though the weight of my work had settled in his mind only now, after everything that had unfolded. I nodded, waiting for him to finish, but the words I wanted to say felt stuck in my throat. I was still processing it all too. The speech, the moment in front of the crowd, the apology that had come so unexpectedly. But it wasn't just about the apology, it was about understanding. Real, tangible understanding. He continued, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I've spent so many years looking at success through such a narrow lens. I was obsessed with the idea of legacy, of what I could leave behind, of what was tangible. But your legacy, Emily, it's something so much more than that. I didn't see it before." I swallowed the lump in my throat. It wasn't easy hearing him admit that, but it was something I had needed to hear for so long. "Dad," I said gently, "I don't need you to see things the way I do. I just needed you to see me." His eyes softened, and he took a deep breath, almost as if he were preparing for something more. He didn't speak right away, but his silence felt different now. There was no tension, no distance between us. "I think I've spent so much of my life trying to make you fit into the mold I created for you, Emily," he said finally, his voice tinged with regret. "I didn't understand what you were trying to build because I was so focused on what I wanted you to become." "I know, Dad, but I built this path for me," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I wasn't trying to reject you. I just needed to be me." He nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the floor for a moment, before meeting mine once more. "I'm sorry for not supporting you, for not seeing the bigger picture. For so long, I thought if you weren't in construction, you were missing something. But now I see the bigger impact you've had. You've been building something, just not in the way I thought. Dad, your support, it means everything. But I've always been my own person. I always will be. That's how I'm able to do what I do," I said, my words softer now, but filled with the conviction I had spent years trying to convey. Henry took another step forward, his eyes looking deeply into mine. "I'm proud of you, Emily," he said quietly, as if the words were finally being spoken from a place of truth. I should have said that years ago. I felt the weight of those words settle in my chest, not as an obligation, but as a genuine recognition of who I was and what I had accomplished. It was a feeling I had longed for, and though it had taken years to reach, it was worth it. I nodded, accepting his apology, not with bitterness, but with grace. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's never too late to rebuild, to make something new. Like the research I do, relationships, like particles, can be restored with time and effort. We can do this." He smiled, a small, tentative smile, but one that seemed to carry a great deal of weight. "You're right," he agreed softly. "It's never too late." We stood in silence for a moment, side by side, the glow from the chandeliers above spilling over us as the crowd continued to thin out. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't just because of the night's achievements or the recognition that had finally come, but because of the way things had shifted between me and my father. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was filled with the understanding we had both been waiting for. "Well," Henry said with a little chuckle, breaking the quiet, I suppose now I can't avoid hearing more about your scientific projects, can I? I grinned, feeling the warmth of his words. I'd be happy to share, Dad. We can start with quantum entanglement, if you're interested. He raised an eyebrow, a teasing glint in his eye. I think that might take some time. But for you, I'll listen. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. As the evening wound down and the last few guests departed, we shared a quiet moment, standing together in the peaceful, dimly lit foyer. I had never imagined that this night, this gala, would be the catalyst for such a profound shift. But it had been. And as I left the Evergreen Manor later that evening, walking side by side with my father, I knew this was the beginning of something new, a chapter we could write together, one where understanding, respect, and love would replace the misunderstandings of the past.